The weather across the United Kingdom is heading into a particularly complex period. And I do mean complex. Right now, conditions are rather unsettled with slow-moving weather fronts dumping considerable rain across many areas. But the pattern is about to shift, and understanding exactly what that means for your region requires looking at the meteorological setup in some detail. Let's start with what's happening today. A weather front that was sitting over southwest England 12 hours ago has barely moved. Normally, a typical Atlantic low would have cleared right through and out into the North Sea by now. This one is crawling eastwards. Why? High pressure firmly established over Scandinavia is blocking the usual eastward progression of these systems. They being forced to dive southwards instead, rotating slowly, and that means prolonged rainfall. Right now, across Wales, you are dealing with heavy rain. Somerset saw flood warnings this morning. The southwest from Cornwall through Devon has been mild and damp all week. Temperatures 5 to 8 degrees above the seasonal average. That mild Atlantic air is about to meet something altogether different. Moving to the Midlands, conditions have been rather dull. Birmingham and surrounding areas hovering around 7 degrees, grey skies, nothing remarkable. For those who find winter weather interesting, it's been tedious. That changes next week. The contrast with Scotland couldn't be sharper. The Scottish Highlands saw temperatures drop to -5 this morning. Bitterly cold with a keen wind. That's the Arctic air we're going to discuss. Eastern Scotland has a rain warning in effect, which is quite unusual for Atlantic weather systems. Normally, Western Scotland bears the brunt, but the wind direction and the orientation of the low-pressure system means eastern areas are getting hammered. Southeasterly winds picking up moisture from the North Sea, giving heavy orographic rainfall across the Grampians and the Cairngorms. Devon has enjoyed pleasant conditions for the past fortnight, mild and relatively dry. That's going to feel like a distant memory by Friday. Jersey and the Channel Islands experienced wind and rain this afternoon worthy of a weather warning. The wind's been brisk across southern coastal areas. Now, the meteorological setup, the Scandinavian high is the key player here. It is not directly over us, which is why we are still unsettled. But it is close enough to block the usual Atlantic progression. These low-pressure systems can move through normally. They being squeezed, rotated southwards, and slowed right down. That blocking pattern is going to strengthen into the weekend and the start of next week. And when it does, we transition from westerly Atlantic flows to easterly continental flows. I've examined the latest model runs from the Met Office, the ECMWF, and the GFS. All of them agree on the broad setup. Cold air moves in, easterly winds develop. But they disagree considerably on the details. The depth of the cold, the exact wind direction, the precise extent of the block. These details matter enormously when it comes to where the cold air reaches and what type of precipitation falls. What we're not seeing is a classic beast from the east, at least not in the short to medium range. All models agree on that. We're not looking at a severe, overwhelming easterly blast with no milder air getting anywhere near us. Instead, we're in a battleground scenario, cold air pushing in from the east, milder sectors trying to push in from the west and south. When those air masses collide, that S, when we see the potential for significant snowfall. But it also means highly variable conditions. Some areas will see rain, some will see snow, many will see a mix. And temperatures will fluctuate considerably depending on which air mass wins out locally. Let me walk through the next 5 days in detail. Then we'll look at what happens beyond that into next week when the real interest begins. Wednesday looks abysmal across much of the country. Further heavy rain moving through in the morning. You can see on the models that rainfall rotating up from the south, coming up against that higher pressure block. It's not over us, but it's halting these systems. More slow-moving rain throughout Wednesday, continuing into Thursday. The wind direction becomes more southeasterly, driving against that high pressure. Eastern Scotland continues to see the worst of it. Rainfall totals mounting considerably. 80 to 120 millimetres possible above around 230 metres elevation across the Grampians. And as the air turns colder through Friday, that rain increasingly turns to snow at higher levels. Temperatures Wednesday are average, 8 to 10 degrees across central and southern England and Wales, 7 to 8 degrees across Scotland. Nothing spectacular. But with the rain and cloud cover, it'll feel rather cold and miserable. Thursday, similar story, 8 to 9 degrees. Thermometer readings don't look too bad, but factor in the persistent rain and blustery wind, and it is unpleasant. Eastern England and Scotland see strong winds as a feature of the weather. That rain continues to pile up, particularly across the higher ground. Friday, temperatures start to nudge downwards, 5 to 8 degrees for most areas. The wind direction is shifting. You will notice it. More of an easterly component developing. Scotland turns colder as those easterly winds push in, showers from the North Sea, and some of them will be wintry over higher ground. Snow above around 300 to 400 metres initially. Saturday, similar. 5 to 8 degrees. The easterly flow is established now. Showers continue slow moving across Northern Ireland, England and Wales, more frequent across eastern areas exposed to that North Sea wind, increasingly wintry. Sunday, 5 to 7 degrees, maybe 8 in a few sheltered spots. The cold air is nudging in more widely now. But this is where it gets interesting. This is where the models start to diverge significantly. Let me show you the range of scenarios for next week, because this is critical for understanding what might happen. On one end, we have the GFS model, the American model. It's showing cold air, yes, but primarily confined to Scotland. The rest of the country sees a mix. The -5-degree isotherm at 850 hectopascals barely reaches northern England. For context, that -5 level is generally the threshold where snow becomes more likely. -8 to -10 is where you get more widespread snow, even at lower levels. The GFS is showing the -5 line hovering around the Scottish border, maybe dipping into northern England at times. That means snow on higher ground across Scotland and northern England. Elsewhere, mostly rain. Cold rain, mind you. 4 or 5 degrees with rain pouring down. Nobody wants that. Miserable conditions. The GFS precipitation charts show lows continuing to pile in from the southwest. Some snow mixing in across the higher ground of northern England and Scotland, which isn't particularly unusual for late January. But further south, predominantly rain. On the other end, we have the ECMWF, the European model. This is considerably more supportive of a cold, even very cold pattern. Easterly winds much stronger by Sunday, proper easterlies pushing in, cold air for everyone, not just Scotland. The -10 isotherm pushing right across the country, even reaching the far south and southwest. In this scenario, milder air tries to push back in from the Atlantic but doesn't succeed, at least not initially. The -10 line stays involved for 4 or 5 days. Yes, milder sectors attempt to win out later next week, but it remains a battle. This scenario gives us cold, potentially very cold, with significant snowfall possible across much of the country. The ECMWF precipitation charts show lots of rain over the coming days, but progressively into the weekend, easterly winds strengthen. More showers turn to snow in the north and east. By Sunday and Monday, predominantly snow. Weather fronts pushing in from the west see snow along them. A messy picture later next week before eventually milder air mixes in and it turns more to rain. The UK Met Office model sits somewhere in between, though it's been variable. Now, if we look at the ensemble runs, the picture becomes clearer in terms of probability. The GFS ensembles show all runs are cold. There are no milder runs. They re-all average or below average. It's just a question of how far below average. Most runs cluster around that -5 to -8 range at 850 hectopascals. Some are milder, some are colder, but they in that realm. Precipitation is high across the board. So we are definitely looking at snowfall in places next week. It's just where. The ECMWF ensembles show a bigger drop. The ensemble mean around -6 to -7 degrees at 850 hectopascals early next week. The GFS was around -4. That is quite a significant difference. And the ECMWF has actually trended colder in the latest run. The midnight run showed more uncertainty. The most recent run is more confident about the cold. What does all this mean? Well, we are looking at Sunday to Monday for the switch. The next couple of days, the models need to firm up on this. We're getting into the 5-day time frame now. It's unusual for the synoptics not to be 90% decided at this range. Normally, intensity of air masses and exact wind directions can be ironed out nearer the time, but whether we actually see -8 to -10 air move in or the 0-degree line, that should be clear by now. The fact that it isn't tells you there is genuine uncertainty. The next 24 to 48 hours will be critical. I am expecting runs to converge on an idea, but we are confident it's going to be cold. That is one thing. All runs show average or well below average temperatures. The question is the exact depth and extent of the cold, and crucially, where the precipitation falls and in what form. The big deciding factor is the strength of the Scandinavian bloc. How strong will that high pressure be against those Atlantic weather fronts trying to push in from the west? That determines everything. If the bloc is strong and well positioned, we get a proper easterly flow, cold air for everyone, and significant snow where weather fronts collide with that cold air. If the bloc is weaker or positioned slightly differently, the cold air doesn't get as far south, and much of the country sees cold rain rather than snow. There's a lot of precipitation coming. That's certain. It's really just what type of precipitation. We are not looking at a clear-cut cold spell with widespread bitterly cold air that some runs were hinting at a few days ago. The models have backed off from that, but they've increased precipitation at the same time. So higher chance of snowfall, but also a higher chance of it being variable and messy. Now, Let me address something I know many of you are thinking. This pattern has been talked about for days. Cold air a week away, beast from the east Mark II, heavy snow. And with each passing day, the forecasts moderate. The extreme cold recedes, the snow amounts reduce, the affected areas shrink. This is frustrating, I understand, but this is how meteorology works when you're dealing with a battleground setup. The uncertainty is genuine. It's not fear-mongering, and it is not incompetence. It is the nature of these patterns. When you have a strong Scandinavian high and Atlantic lows trying to push through, small changes in the positioning of that high, small changes in the strength of those lows, small changes in the exact track, all of these cascade into very different outcomes on the ground. A shift of 50 miles in where a weather front stalls can mean the difference between 10 centimeters of snow and cold rain. For those of you who remember the Great Storm of 1987, you know that forecasts can go wrong. Michael Fish famously said there wasn't a hurricane coming. There was. Gusts exceeded 100 miles per hour. 18 people died. Millions of trees felled. The models missed it until very late. But you also know that modern forecasting is considerably better. We have better models, better data, better understanding. The uncertainty we are discussing now is being communicated clearly and honestly. That S progress. The Burnsday storm in 1990 saw gusts of 107 miles per hour, 47 deaths across the UK. These were severe events. What we are looking at next week is not in that category. This is a cold spell with precipitation. It S significant, but it S not apocalyptic. The beast from the east in 2018 brought Siberian air, minus 14 Celsius in places. Significant snow across the country, widespread disruption. That was a clear-cut easterly blast with no milder air getting anywhere near us for days. What we potentially seeing next week is different. It S a battle, cold air versus milder air. The outcome depends on which wins. So, practical advice. What should you actually do? First, stay informed. The next 2 days will clarify the situation considerably. Check forecasts from the Met Office daily. The uncertainty will reduce. Second, prepare for cold and wet conditions regardless. Even if we don't get the full easterly blast, we are still looking at temperatures below average and considerable precipitation. If you are in Scotland or Northern England, prepare for snow. It's coming in some capacity. Stock up on essentials if you live in rural areas or higher ground. Make sure you have enough heating fuel. Check on elderly neighbours. If you are further south, prepare for a mix. You might see snow, you might see cold rain, you might see both. Have warm, waterproof clothing ready. If you need to travel, check conditions before you set out. Roads might be wet, icy, or snow-covered depending on exactly where that battleground sets up. Third, don't panic. This is winter. Cold and wet is what winter does. We've seen worse. The country want to grind to a halt. But equally, don't be complacent. Conditions will be challenging in places. Respect the weather. For those in areas that don't see snow often, the southeast, for instance, if snow does arrive, it can cause more disruption than it would up north, simply because the infrastructure isn't geared for it. Roads want to be gritted as thoroughly. People want to have snow shovels to hand, and that S, fair enough. If the forecast firms up on snow for your area, consider working from home if possible. Give yourself extra time for journeys. Drive cautiously if you must drive. For those in Scotland already dealing with heavy rain and the transition to snow at higher levels, you know the drill. Multiple gritting sessions if needed. Just grit once and assume you are sorted. The rain warning for eastern Scotland through Wednesday into Friday is serious. Flooding is possible with those rainfall totals. If you are in affected areas, move valuables upstairs, keep an eye on watercourses and stay alert to Environment Agency or SEPA warnings. The temperature swings over recent weeks have been considerable. One day 12 degrees, next day 3, then back up. People have been poorly, sinus trouble, headaches, general malaise. That back and forth ends next week when more sustained cold moves in. That might actually bring relief for some in terms of consistency, even if it's consistently cold. Now, looking beyond next week into the longer range, the models are still quite uncertain there as well. Some show the cold persisting, others show milder air winning out by the end of next week or into the following week. The Scandinavian bloc will eventually weaken. It always does. The Atlantic will reassert itself. The question is when. February can be a snowy month in the UK. It can also be mild and wet. We'll have to see how this pattern evolves. The jet stream is being influenced by a cold plunge across the eastern United States. That strengthens the jet temporarily, but it's likely to shoot through the Mediterranean, causing low pressure there and maintaining that high pressure over Scandinavia. That feeds into the easterly setup we are discussing. But the exact evolution depends on how all these pieces interact. It's a complex global system. One thing I can say with confidence, whatever happens next week, we'll know a lot more in 48 hours. the models will have to commit. We re-inside the 5-day window now. The synoptics should become clear, and when they do, I'll update you. For now, expect cold, wet, and wintry conditions to develop over the weekend and into next week. Prepare sensibly, stay informed. Don T, let frustration with forecast changes cloud your judgment. The uncertainty is real, and communicating it honestly is better than giving you false confidence. This time next week, we could be seeing significant snowfall across parts of the country, or we could be seeing cold rain. The spectrum of outcomes is still quite wide, but we are narrowing it down. And whatever happens, you'll be prepared if you follow the advice I've outlined. Keep an eye on the forecasts, check back for updates, and remember, winter means cold and wet. This is what we signed up for when we chose to live in the British Isles. We've handled worse. We'll handle this. I'll have more detailed updates as the models converge. Until then, stay safe, stay warm,